Hello, my name is Molly, and I'll be reading to you Jane's Pet. Jane Austen was a fortunate little girl. She had a big, beautiful doggie all her very own. Rover had come to the house when Jane was a wee little girl, and the two had grown up together. They loved each other very much. Sometimes Jane would pretend Rover was sick. Then she would dress up as a nurse and try to give him medicine out of a bottle. But Rover was too wise for that. He didn't mind her tying him up all in bandages, but he did draw the line at taking medicine, unless it was something with plenty of sugar. Rover was like Mary's little lamb. He followed Jane everywhere she went. If she went into town shopping for her mama, Rover would go too. He even went to school with her, and it was the biggest job in the world to keep him out of the classroom. However, he was very obedient, and when Jane said no as though she meant it, Rover would always do what he was told. Then one night, Rover disappeared. In the morning, Jane went to his kennel as usual to give him his breakfast, but he was not there. All day she waited for him to come back, but he did not return. "Mama," she said at last, "I must go and look for him. He surely must be dreadfully hungry by now." But Mama persuaded her to wait until the morning to see if he would not come back. But morning came again, and there was no sign of Rover. Then they both began to get alarmed and made inquiries among the neighbors, even going to the police station, but in vain. When Jane reached home after school and learned that Rover had not yet returned, she made up her mind to go and search for him. She knew one place that Rover liked very much, and it occurred to her that he might have gone there and met with some accident. It was a small forest, a few miles out of the town, where there were many rapids. Jane was so determined to find her beloved Rover that she had no fear of the woods or the lonely road. Bravely she stepped out calling, "Rover! Rover!" every few yards, but there was no response. No happy, barking Rover came bounding to answer her call. She began to get a little discouraged and wondered if it was really worthwhile going on. Then she decided that she would walk another 300 steps and then turn back. She began to count the steps, and in a little while passed 100, then 200, then 300. She was just turning around to go home when from somewhere on the right came a low wail as if someone in pain. Poor little Jane was very much frightened, for it suddenly occurred to her that she was all alone in the woods. Then the sound came again, a little different this time. A new idea came to Jane. She thought she had heard that noise before, sometimes in the middle of the night when Rover was lonesome, or perhaps when he was trying to sing to the moon, as some dogs do. Again the sound came, this time a little more distinctly. Jane now felt sure that it was Rover's voice. It took a lot of courage to do it, but Jane was so determined to rescue her beloved pet that she turned off the footpath and made her way through the trees in the direction from which the sound had come. As she went on, the wail became clearer and clearer until at last, peering through some bushes, she discovered Rover lying on the ground with his front paw caught in a steel trap. "Oh, my poor Rover!" she cried, kneeling down beside him. "Somehow I must let you free." Jane had not seen a trap like this before, but she worked away at it until at last she had the teeth open wide enough to let poor Rover pull his foot out. Rover wanted to say how thankful he was, but he was too weak to give more than a faint wag of his tail. Jane had brought some biscuits with her in the hope of finding her pet, and now she gave them to him. How glad he was for some food, for he had not had any for 2 whole days. Then there was the job of getting Rover home. He couldn't put his poor foot to the ground, and he had to limp all the way back on 3 legs. It took a long time, and Jane wished many times that she could carry Rover, but of course he was much too big for that. However, at last they reached home. In her delight at seeing Rover back again, Mama forgot to scold Jane for going away all by herself. She said she thought Jane was a very brave little girl to go so far in search of her pet, but that she mustn't do it again without letting her know. And now Jane had to be a real nurse to Rover. A doctor came and put his leg in bandages, but afterward Jane felt it her special duty to give Rover's leg extra treatment, as much as he would let her, until it was quite well. Rover never forgot Jane's kindness to him, and when he was well again, he loved his little mistress more than ever. In his doggy way, he seemed to try to show her how much he loved her. He never let her go far out of his sight. One afternoon, some months later, Jane took Rover with her for a walk by the river. He loved to go there, for there were so many things to chase. It was a very pretty walk, and they had often taken it together before. Mother, of course, had told Jane that she must never leave the footpath, and it was only on this condition that she was allowed to go there. But somehow, this time Jane forgot. She noticed some pretty flowers growing down by the water's edge, and thought it would be nice to pick them and take them home. She felt sure Mama wouldn't mind, especially when she saw the flowers. But the bank was very slippery, and much steeper than Jane had at first thought. Tripping over a tree root, she fell forward, rolled over, and splashed into the water. In a moment, she was caught by the swiftly flowing tide and carried out into the stream. "Help!" she screamed. There was no one about, but Rover, chasing the cows in the field, heard the cry. He looked around, and seeing that Jane was no longer on the bank where he had left her, seemed to guess at once what had happened. Like a flash, he bounded to the riverside. There was a spring and a splash, and a moment later, Rover was swimming as hard as he could toward the struggling, spluttering figure of little Jane. Now it was Rover's turn to help Jane. The brave doggy put every ounce of his strength into the race to save his mistress. On and on he swam. Just in time, he reached her and caught her clothes in his teeth. Then came the hard struggle of swimming with her to the bank. But he did it, and as they were nearing the bank, Jane was able to catch hold of a tree stump, which helped them both to scramble ashore. What happened when at last the 2 soaked, bedraggled friends arrived home, I must leave you to imagine. When Mama heard Jane's story, she didn't know whether to scold or to cry or to laugh, for very gladness that they had both come back safe. One thing I can tell you, and that is Rover was given the most wonderful supper that evening that ever a dog enjoyed, better than anything Rover could imagine, or that he might have imagined in his most hungry moments. Jane and Rover remained the closest and best of friends as long as he lived. And all the children around who heard of Rover's gallant rescue learned the lesson that kindness to animals is always rewarded.